It's worth noting some recent stats that support these recommendations. The City of Regina recently updated its neighborhood profiles, as Councillor Stadnicek noted, from 2021. This data highlights a loss of population across the majority of central neighborhood zones between 2016 and 2021, including Lakeview, Hillsdale, Heritage, Center Square, and North Central. The downtown faced a 36% population loss and now houses only 430 people with an average age of 62. We are failing at intensification because we continue to build visionary documents rather than tools for implementation. The Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation produces rental market reports that are released annually. In the most recent report from January 2024, Regina had a vacancy rate of 1.4%, with an average two-bedroom rent up 7.9% to $1,301. To provide context, a healthy vacancy rate is considered around 3%. Anything lower than this rate makes it extremely difficult for low-income residents in particular to compete for units. We can boast about home ownership being more accessible compared to other urban markets, but this does little to address the affordability issues that confront our population. The increase in multi-unit dwellings along strategic areas of the city addresses this concern by concentrating and increasing supply in areas that are attractive and accessible. You have no doubt heard from other delegates today that have diverse opinions about the correct path forward in achieving the goals set out in our planning policies and our frameworks. You will hear opinions about the need to retain the status quo, the importance of retaining the character of neighborhoods, the need to protect property values, and the views that must be retained. I ask you to reflect on how these concerns address the affordability crisis that is unfolding in our city, a crisis that is the result of decades of doing and protecting these very things. I ask you to consider who is being represented in these voices of opposition and whether they reflect the needs of seniors wanting to downsize, young people, recent immigrants, small families, and low-income households who most need the housing flexibility that can grow with these recommendations. I ask you to reflect on whether historic documents were written to tackle contemporary environmental or affordability issues. Today's decisions must take us into the future. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathews. Councillor Stadnicek has some questions.
And as a professor who studies urban planning and issues, the fact that the greenfield areas, the suburbs, have grown so much in population and they do have more density in terms of the kinds of options. So do you see that as we just don't have enough of that option in the core of the city, and that's why these kinds of recommendations are important, or is it just that people want to live in the greenfields?
Yeah, I think we've supported what I would call exclusionary zoning practices, the single family zones, probably since the 1940s. So it's been a long time that we've worked to kind of push out any kind of housing diversity from the central areas in our city. You speak to the increased density that exists in our newer suburban locations, and that's a density that actually allows things like public transit to exist. But the problem that we're having is that we don't have that density in the core areas of our city. And so we continue to build outwards in a sprawling kind of capacity, which puts a lot of pressure on all of our services, all of our systems, and will eventually just make our taxes increase quite exponentially once we hit a point where it becomes unfeasible to actually be able to maintain and replace some of the existing infrastructure that's now built in that area. So it's absolutely essential that we work towards actually increasing the density levels within the core areas to get them to a point where we can actually have services and such as public transit, and we can run more lines and we can have grocery stores because there's enough people that are living in these spaces. As I was mentioning, most of the central areas have lost population from the period between 2016 and 2021, and that's a concern. So we are going to just continue in that pattern if we don't actually make some significant changes.
Thank you, Councillor Stadnicek. Councillor LeBlanc, please go ahead.
In your submission, you'd referenced environmental sustainability. I wonder, do you have any reflections on the impact that passing what's proposed today might have on the city's environmental sustainability goals.
Yeah, I think our energy and sustainability framework certainly places spatial densification as well as active transportation as key elements that we're trying to hit in order to reach our goals. I know that there are a number of national and international organizations that are very supportive of some of these measures because of the recognized benefits on the environment that they will bring. Certainly we can see density as a climate action, and we need to kind of think about the sustainability crisis and the affordability crisis as two things that are very much interlinked, and we can't separate them out. So, the David Suzuki Foundation is one example, is a group that's very supportive of these kinds of changes happening across Canada because we recognize the issues that are happening with the continued sprawling kind of peripheral development that's being seen. And we understand and recognize that shared walls are much lower in terms are much better in terms of the emissions that they produce, and we need to start thinking about how to make sure that we're living in smaller units, more compact developments, and that will enable us then to be able to have choice to do other forms of transportation. I know people always say, like, we live in a car-centric city, but if we keep creating the urban form that supports it, then we can't ever shift. But if we can create a situation where people can choose to walk to work or to bike to work, then we have choice. And that's really what moving in a sustainable direction, I think, for me, is all about.